place where the truth should be kept.
The arts and music scene really shows what people are about.
Share what's going on here in York.
It makes you feel like a family.
Local art has a face that most people can relate.
Our community up here that sticks together.
Art is art.
Great potential with great artists, poets, singers, writers, directors, filmmakers. It's fantastic. Everyone has a story to tell.
That moment, you have to capture that moment and share it with the rest of the world.
Showing something that maybe has not been seen before.
Without art, what is this life?
I am art. I've been art ever since I was born.
It really adds a great deal to our community.
We don't really need art to exist, but you need art to live.
Culture in Maine is important, and I think playing it out is important, and playing open mics and playing wherever you can play. It's all about us all checking in with each other.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we need to put on our very serious faces because this is a serious, artistic, highbrow interview. I'm just kidding. However, it is really exciting to have you on the show because you are the new Poet Laureate of York City. You are the official poet, the voice of culture for the government, the advocate of the written word, the person in charge with the publicity of poetry for the city, and a whole slew of people that will now be excited about literacy because of you.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Bam, no pressure.
Yeah, right? I'm gone now. I'm sorry. I can't do this. Yeah.
No, I mean, that is so exciting.
It is exciting.
So as of National Poetry Month, April 2014, for at the very least the next 2 years, you are the City of York's official poet.
I am.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I know everybody is dying to know more about you. So I guess we should probably concede to them, give them the rundown, because the irony is you did not start off as a poet.
No.
You started off doing fiction.
Yes.
So how did the fiction writing get started for you, and then how did you make the transition into working on poetry?
The fiction writing started when I was 9, probably before then, but the recognition of it
Daggone
as a
prodigies.
gift, right? I had a teacher who informed me that I was in fact a writer as a result of an exercise homework that she'd given us, and so from that point on, I just knew, like,
title. You are a writer.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't write. You are a writer.
Yes, exactly. And it was like that. The weight of it was like, yeah, I know what I was put on this earth for. And I remember like running home, was like telling my mom and dad, I know what I'm going to be a writer when I grow up. And they were like, no, you want to eat? You're going to go to school. You're going to be my father wanted me to be a doctor. And so I took a detour and went into the medical field actually for a long time. Wow. And it wasn't until I had my son, and he was born with a lot of complications 21 years ago. And it for a while looked like he may not make it. And in that moment, it was just like, I've got to do this. I've got to be a writer. I have to.
Wow, that was the moment?
That was the moment. Because if this little life, if he makes it, I have to live a life for him and leave him something that says, you can do what you were put here to do. You don't have to compromise yourself and sell out. But I could only do it if I was, living it. I couldn't just
You can't teach your son to be true to himself.
That's
if
right.
You can't do it yourself.
Exactly right. So I went the hard road, like no money, struggling, but I had to do this. I had to. And I've been working as a writer now for 15 years.
And your book, Sap Rising, is mega massive.
Yeah, I know, right?
How cool is that?
Amazing.
So tell me about Sap Rising. How did that come to be?
Sap Rising, I went to, the way that I decided I was going to be a writer, because I had no idea, like, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to do this, right?
Right. I know I'm a writer.
Right, but what?
Next,
go to
what
New
next?
York, like that, so I decided to go to Washington College, which at the time had this thing called the Sophie Kerr Award. Still, the Sophie Kerr Award, which is this amazing award,
Very
at the time,
prestigious.
the largest undergraduate award for a writer. And I just said, I'm going to this school, and I'm going to win that thing. So I'm gonna learn everything I can, and I'm gonna win it. So I went and I just absorbed like everything I could. I wrote every single day for 3 years. I was all in, just all in. The music I listened, everything that inspired me, even the suffering that my son and I was experiencing at the time. It was like all of it became like this. And my grandmother, who was the storyteller, I talked about her at the ceremony for Poet Laureate. Like she really, she's been the fuel for all of this, because I know if that woman had been born at a different time, Carla, that she would be a writer. I know it. That woman loved language, and she was so brilliant with words and telling stories. It would just blow you away. And so she was actually dying. We had to write a thesis at Washington College in order to apply for the award and in order to graduate. And so I decided to do Sap Rising, a novel written in stories. And as I was writing it, she was dying. And I was like, I'm writing this for you. You're going to see me graduate. She says, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to be here. So it was just like all of that, this whole everything from 9 being told you're a writer, my grandmother legacy, my son, just
funneled it all
right
into
this
one
thing.
creation.
Yeah.
And then, what's the story that happened from the book?
And then I ended up on in the news and won the award on the Oprah show. And
I love how you just toss out, the Oprah show.
It's all like,
I was an Oprah phenomenal woman, and then I went to the supermarket.
I got some tuna fish, and yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, right. So
it is what it is.
It is. Yeah, and then my whole life completely transformed from that moment onward.
And then how did you end up here in the humble hamlet of York, Pennsylvania, advocating for literacy and in our little local schools?
Everything leads back to my son. He was struggling, had some neurological problems as a result of all the stuff that happened when he was first born, and needed a good school system. So I started researching. I was in Maryland, and I was like, I'm getting this young man. He's going to have everything that he needs to make it, even if I had to move to another state to do it. And that's what I did. Found out about York, the schools here, great. Moved up here, kind of took a hiatus from about 2006 until 2008, just to focus on him, no writing, just trying to get him together. And then he graduated from high school, and now he's about to graduate from college. And it's like it was my turn to get back into what that teacher told that 9-year-old little girl, like, you're a writer.
And so what made you decide to start turning to poetry and to begin learning to express yourself in that way?
That's a good question. I am so intimidated by poetry and poets. I am. And so I went back for an MFA in 2008 in creative writing and publishing, and I took a challenge for poetry workshop, and it was just the most amazing experience. And the impact that it had on my fiction writing, I had no idea. So I started dabbling a little bit, just writing really horrible, horrible poems, because that's like, you have to be, brave enough to write crap. Mm-hmm. Right?
You do.
So
yes, you do.
I got a whole book full. And then it just kind of, when the opportunity came for Poet Laureate and it said that it was open to all of the literary fields, I thought, what better way to bridge the fiction with the poetry and try to reach as many people as I possibly can with, in the literary art field.
So what are some of the things that you would like to do with your time as the laureate? What are some of the ways that you want to try to reach people, or some of the people you want to connect with? I know you said you want to bridge the gap between the poet community and the fiction community and create more of a literary community in the area, because we don't have a whole lot of that, where there's not a lot of outreach for the fiction writers, for the story writers and the storytellers.
Yeah, that's right.
But what else can we look for from you in the next couple of years?
My dream of all dreams is to have a writing center in place somewhere in the city, a place where fiction writers and poets can come and have people come in and do workshops and craft talks and lectures, and just a place where they can come and be supported and know that, you know, that this is significant, that you're absolutely necessary in this community in order for us to survive. I look at like the Harlem Renaissance period and just that explosion of language and art that came out of that, and it was the poets and the fiction writers. Like, I believe that was the reason why it was so successful. It wasn't just poets getting together, it wasn't just fiction writers getting together. There were playwrights, there was musicians, visual artists, like everyone brought this thing together, and we see what happened. Why can't York be that? You know, why can't we have a Harlem Renaissance explosion here in York, you know? But it's gonna happen when all of us come together and bring all our talents to the table. So that's what I like to see.
I am excited,
Yeah, right.
excited by this. I know what I want to do is I want to hear some work. Can we do that?
We can.
Okay, we're ready when you are.
All right. This first poem is my dedication to York. I thought I would share it with you today. It's called One Friday Evening in York, PA. Being struck by food is a lot like falling in love in Nona's kitchen. The green Naugahyde chairs and the flour-dusted Formica table where she makes homemade buttermilk biscuits that flake and fall apart in the mouth and hands. She says, "Eat," and I am struck by how beautiful a bowl of split pea soup can be on a Sunday afternoon, or a burger from a food truck at the corner of Pershing and Philadelphia in the company of strangers in the city, and the rain is coming down. In stages. I wrote this because I'm in the middle of a child and a mother, and so I'm not vulnerable and young anymore, and I'm not yet at the place where I'm ready to leave the world. So I'm kind of trying to find my own way in stages. I am gray, the belly of rain doves, the frail cage of sinew and bone, thudding heart, as vulnerable and unburdened as water. I am the edge of age, that slice of dying half-light, the severing between what is and what is becoming. I am as unsearchable as the Soluvian Sea. Beneath its surface, the silvery shimmers of darting fish, as mysterious and elusive as memory. Exactly this. I started writing exactly this when my son was about 6 years old. He would have nightmares and he would run to me. And in the mornings, I would position myself so that I would always be there waiting for him to come. And now he's 21 years old, getting ready to graduate from college. And I picked this poem up a few days ago, and I revised it and finished it. And ironically, my son just had his son. So this poem is about mourning the losing of a son as he goes into manhood. He nearly flies, heart racing to escape monsters that can only inhabit a little boy's sleep, to where I sit in the hush of day, waiting for exactly this desperate scramble for lap and arms created for exactly this. He holds his ear against my chest and listens to the sounds of sea, the syncopation of first memory. My heart beat, his heart beat. Quiet enters him with a sigh that speaks, this will always be. We have always been exactly this. Just that quick, and he grows restless and squirmy, ready to rise into manhood. No telling how far he will go or how hard it will be to find his way back to exactly this. In my quiet morning, I will wait for him, pray for him until it's time for me to fumble, find my own footing to my first knowing exactly this. This poem is a fun poem. I was given a challenge of writing a poem with my name in it. It's called When Willie Mays Puckett Was a Boy. Friend of my uncle's had a yellow caddy back in the day, convertible. This mad German shepherd used to ride shotgun. I had to sit in the back with my uncle, but I was 8, riding in a yellow convertible, and that was just fine. Man, we used to ride that thing like tomorrow wasn't ever gonna come, as if each day was a string of right nows. Once we drove up on this little girlie, standing at the bus stop like she had been waiting all her life for that yellow caddy with the mad German shepherd in front. I can still see her face as we passed by, and I turned round in my seat. Her mouth was open. Her front tooth chipped. She smelled like first rain, like the white sea and a storm coming. But only me and the dog took notice like animals do when a storm's bearing down. When a storm's bearing down. What'd you say your name was again? Yeah, that's right. Christine Lincoln. This last piece is from Sap Rising. I thought that I would give you an excerpt of fiction. Fiction is my first love, and it will always be, even as I take this journey into where poetry is going to take me. I will never stray or be an adulteress on my fiction. I read this every time I did a reading when I was on book tour, and it caused a lot of controversy. You'll see in a minute why. It's two women, Abby and Ruthie, and you'll hear both of their voices, starting with Ruthie. Abby say God must be a woman, that we was made in her image, though she whispers it like she's afraid he may hear her talking about her that way. I tell her she's blaspheming. Abby say she been blasphemed against all her life, that I've been blasphemed against too, just because we women folk. She asked me to think over how many times someone spoke to me, to my womanness, with irreverence. Me, a sacred being like them stars, only Abby say more so because I was fashioned in God's likeness, and me not ever knowing it. I laugh at her, but that night, when I creep back home and let myself from the screen door real quiet so's not to wake Leonard, something deep down in my belly tingles at the idea of God, with nappy hair, coffee and cream skin, and lips thick as plums, looking like me. Ruthie craves a child of her own the way I once ached to leave Granville. So I tell her about when I was pregnant with Pontella, when she first fluttered, and the women who already had children, how they told me it would feel like I had a belly full of butterflies. Only it wasn't like that at all. I felt butterflies before. They came with the fear. This was something else, more like dove wings, bringing me peace for the first time in my life. And for a while, I thought I was having a bird until I saw the cold, black coils of hair peeking from between my thighs. When the midwife turned Pontella's head in order to sweep her mouth, seeing her face, that ancient face, I realized for the first time that a whole being had lived in me. The arm made it so I could barely breathe or move. I could hardly hear the midwife telling me to push one more time, the shoulders, and me taking the deepest breath I could, so deep my chest burned, hunching my back and pushing with all my might. I felt in my soul more than in my body the ripping, like the ripping of the veil. Shaking, I fell backward onto the bed. My eyes rolled up into my head. It was like I'd fallen into the bluest of oceans, sinking into the warm, rushing rivers of life. I had fallen into myself. I had become the world, my womb, the center of the universe. I had become one with God, one who knew what it meant to be creator, life giver. That's how come I know God is a woman.
Hi, I'm Rick Kerns. I'm the Poet Laureate of Harrisburg, PA, and I have some poems here for you. The first one is a very short piece called Security. At night, she locks the doors twice after hearing the voices calling her. Next one is a poem that I wrote in response to something that the great writer Jack Kerouac wrote. Kerouac's birthday was yesterday, so I thought I'd read this one. And the title of the poem is called People in Small Rooms. And the prompt from Kerouac was his rule number 5 that goes, something that you feel will find its own form. I knew it was there, connection. Kid wearing tie and fancy shirt, normally dressed in jeans. I asked, "Court date?" He looked at me blankly. You smiled and said, "Wow, haven't heard that one for a long, long time." We were the only ones laughing at this and became friends, allies from a place where ties used to mean police, DAs, bikers in court, people in tight places and small rooms. The next one is a poem that I wrote that addresses Dr. King. I wrote this for Martin Luther King Day about a year ago. And the poem is called "To This Struggle." I wish I could find the answer in a book. And there it would be in black and white, but no such luck. And I'm looking up to you, Dr. King, today. When you led the Poor People's Campaign, did you see this coming? Did you see too many people working too many hours for so little, for so long? Did you see people, families with full-time jobs, standing in line at food banks, the families of soldiers needing food stamps? Did you foresee that we would spend more, much more, on incarceration instead of education? It was in April 1968. When you spoke to black sanitation workers from a Memphis union, you said, "We've got to give ourselves to this struggle until the end." You said this the day before the forces of hate stole you from us. And in our rage and grief, we forgot for a moment that you had crossed color lines, but not picket lines, to bring us all together for a few glorious seconds that we are hoping to see again. The struggle is not over, Dr. King. And I'll keep reading, I'll keep searching through those powerful and inspiring speeches you bequeathed to us in the hopes we would avoid, quote, the racism, militarism, and materialism, unquote, you tried to warn us about. The struggle is far from over, Dr. King, and we will need your strength to make it to the end.
We are back with the newly minted and very impressive, brand new Poet Laureate of our state's glorious capital, the leader of the poetic community in Harrisburg for the next 4 years, Rick Kerns.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us,
Thank
Rick.
you. Thank
and
you.
congratulations, official online congratulations. So now the Poet Laureateship of Harrisburg is very different from York and Lancaster and Harrisburg and Hanover. How exactly did that process occur? How did you go from being a poet to waking up one day as the Poet Laureate of Harrisburg?
Well, it was, there are folks within the city government who became part of a committee that was tasked with choosing, among other things, a poet laureate. These are folks involved in the arts and so forth. And one of the people involved is a friend of mine named Joyce Davis, who is the PR person for Mayor Papenfuse. And Joyce, I got to know Joyce actually after reading that poem that I read earlier for Dr. King.
Wow.
And because she enjoyed that so much, she told me, "Well, Rick, I'll try and help you out where I can." And I thought, that's great.
Right.
And in December, somewhere in mid to late December, Joyce told me, she said, "Rick, I'm going to nominate you to be Poet Laureate."
Wow.
And I sent her some materials. I said, "Thanks." And honestly, that...
Right, as far as you knew, that was the end of it.
That was a nice thing, Joyce. I'll remember that.
Thanks for the nomination. Thanks for the nod.
I will remember that. And don't you know, about a month or so later, I guess it was the week before Martin Luther King Day, I get an email from Joyce saying, "Listen, you're going to receive a note from the mayor saying that you have been named Poet Laureate."
Wow.
And that was that was the process, really. And then he read a proclamation to me, you know, saying that I'm the Poet Laureate at a Martin Luther King Day event on Martin Luther King Day. And right before he handed me the proclamation and read it, he said, "And I really like your poem, Rick. Could I read it?" So the mayor read my poem at the event. So yeah, it was quite an honor, and it was a real nice surprise too. I did not see it coming. A lot of my poems are about stories and poems where I address various folks. But sometimes I write other kinds of pieces. This one is about a rainforest in Puerto Rico. And I'm half Puerto Rican, and I really miss the island, especially in cold weather like now. And this is just called El Yunque Rainforest, Puerto Rico. Everything is alive in El Yunque. The air is wet from erotic kisses, a million bird songs, insects, translucent tree frogs, and the fluttering racket of bats emerging from caves that were everybody's home for a while. Ancient trees breathing mist, fat from the sun, the steam coming off the swamp. People disappear in El Yunque on a regular basis, leaving cameras, swords, shreds of clothing, cries of despair, arrows with rock tips. And it's no wonder. Rainforests have healthy appetites.
So what is the difference for you as a poet, you were already very active, did a great deal of touring, do a lot of jazz-themed poetry with the Con Alma Trio or Con Alma Quartet, Con Alma Duo, whatever incarnation it's in at the time. So how is it what difference is this going to make for you?
It's going to provide me more visibility, and it sort of creates a forum. It creates a platform for me. That not only in terms of trying to promote poetry in general in the city area, where it's been thriving fairly well for years, but also I'm hoping to develop some poetry and creative writing workshops in the Latino neighborhood in the city and in other neighborhoods in the city. And by being Poet Laureate, I think it's going to make it easier for the potential funders to say, okay, well, this is, it lends a little bit of credibility to my message. And for that, I'm very happy and grateful for it. So I think that's going to be the big focus for me in helping to create that writing workshops as well as other kinds of art programming in the barrio and in all the city neighborhoods. This is a poem I wrote for my American grandfather, for my grandpa Kerns. It's a short one. It's called Sweet Grapes. Concord grape jelly made from grapes from a vine first planted 70 years ago by my grandpa. Doesn't taste like violin sonatas or anger at the world or burnished colors from his paintings. It tastes very good, sweet, rich flavor, more like my grandma cutting a part of the vine that curls behind the chicken house and taping it, so a wild 4-year-old could pick them and be delighted forever. Yeah, that's it. As you know, with the funding cuts in education,
fewer and fewer of these kids are getting this in their schools.
Exactly. Among the first things to go are the arts.
Always.
So there's many of us in the arts community, poets, musicians, actors, whoever. I think a lot of us are thinking along the same lines. That is, how do we help mitigate that? Okay. How do we provide those opportunities? Especially, there's so much talent in our communities and with the young folks, and there are very few outlets. And we've also found, all of us who've been working in the arts for years, that when you provide those kind of opportunities for young folks, it helps them just do better in general. They have found that the vast majority of young people who are involved in arts programming do not end up in trouble, to put it mildly. And in many cases, the students who are involved in these kinds of arts programs also tend to do well in school, or sometimes very well.
Okay.
And we have the stats, we have the information to back that up. We also have the reality that communities that invest in arts reap benefits, economic benefits, from the arts places drawing tourists and eventually, hopefully, giving employment to artists who also, their money goes back into the economy.
Right.
A couple short, brief examples on the national scene. Right now, I think funding for the arts through the NEA and whatnot is somewhere around 150 million, 140 million.
Which sounds like a lot, but then...
But the city of Paris, the one city,
Right.
invests $2 billion. $1 billion to $2 billion.
Oh my gosh.
And it comes back.
Yes.
You invest in museums, you invest in art spaces, you invest in music, and people create the arts, people come to see it, people buy it.
People tour from around the world to go to Paris for that art scene, and they have invested in that. I know in York that's been a huge issue, is coordinating the art community with the commercial community, the downtown business community, with the government community. Even little things like changing the parking meters to end early so that more people can come to the concert venues and things like that downtown that they wouldn't normally have come to, because there is this growing recognition that if you invest in the arts, that's what creates quality of life. That's what makes a city a destination, a place that people want to come to, not just to sleep and create a bedroom community, or not just to work, but to live, to actually be in. It's the arts. That's what makes that difference.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And on top of everything else, we've also found that using those creative faculties is good for us intellectually. It's good for our minds, it's good for our brains, and ultimately helps the entire culture.
Right. When you wanted to say, wake up, people.
Yeah. And the arts provide a means of conveying certain messages, of telling certain stories that don't necessarily get portrayed in media that depends on a strictly commercial arrangement. One of the themes, I could call it, of some of my poetry in the last few years was crows. I've written a series of poems involving crows, and this is one of my crow poems that is connected to Harrisburg, to downtown Harrisburg. And it's called Crows Midtown Battalion. They swoop in from the south, targeting the cars of state workers and apartment dwellers on a side street near the Capitol. Multicolored splatter. Crow has a new hobby. He and his Midtown Battalion align themselves on the telephone wire that runs just above the unlucky vehicles. At the same time of day, just before dusk, and maybe there's another pattern. It does happen in sequence, probably follows a melody. No one interested in transcribing this one. Crow has a new hobby. He's tired of banking. That as I was growing up, what I did not see on TV and movies and so forth, and more or less the same now, were adequate or fair portrayals of people in my family.
So true.
So my mother was a university professor who spoke 6 languages.
Wow.
I didn't see portrayals of Puerto Ricans like her.
That's true, and you still don't.
And you still don't. And other people in my family, there are doctors and engineers in my family. Okay, they're not. You don't see them on TV. There's a few more positive characters showing up, but in general, the old problems still exist.
You have to work to find you know, positive images and normal, natural images of Hispanic people
And we
in
also
any kind of art and media.
And we also know that those images in the media affect the way young people see themselves.
That's true.
You know, and so it's yet another reason to try and work against that. This is another poem sort of about Puerto Rico, and the place that I'm describing in the poem is was an old bodega, an old Latino grocery store that used to be in the Allison Hill neighborhood of Harrisburg. But after going to that store one day in the wintertime, I wrote this poem, which is called Missing You as Usual in the Wintertime. Hidden in the trunk of the Ausubo, floating through the house in Las Lomas, riding the blood blossoms of the flamboyant inside the guitar, Boricua, Puerto Rican, Latino, Hispanic. All these words don't catch the smell or spark or the goosebump charge volt rumbling up my spine and through my head when I think of you, Borinquen, Puerto Rico. And I think of you, Puerto Rico. As I sit in front of this computer screen, wrestling articles out of actions, statistics, subtle assaults, and the sulfurous vapor coming out of politicians' mouths, I dream of you, my beautiful, brilliant, deranged country. I make do, trying to help my young cousins deal with the language of industrial consonants, the language of Shakespeare, Updike, and of Espada and Soto, of Martin Luther King and of English-only paranoia, the language of lynching. I remember sea breezes when I shopped the bodega for cafe puro, bacalao, candles with San Lázaro, and enormous plastic dolls wrapped in clear sheets, enormous Indian chief figures designed as if there were still Taínos in Puerto Rico, and the secret is there are. There in Vega's Spanish-American grocery, there in my mother's house, there on the street, in front of the church, on Market Street. Inside the Jautía, in the air above the cinnamon-colored girls laughing in the doorway, in the roar of the engines gunning down Dairy Street, I see you, Borinquen. I cry for you, and my blood that has returned to the earth, your earth, Puerto Rico, for Abuelo, my mom, Tío Raúl, for the people and the things, not here, not now, not within reach. Puerto Rico, I'll be looking for you again tonight.
You are also a teacher and a journalist and a poet. Are there any other hidden in the many lives of Rick Kerns?
Not so hidden. Well, as a journalist, first of all, I should mention that I write, and I have been writing for a publication called Indian Country Today Media Network, which is a native news publication. It's the biggest one in North America. And I cover indigenous Latin America for them, as well as a few other issues. And I've been a reporter, full-time or part-time, since 1986. So that's been a part of me a long while. And that also feeds into my poetry. But the other thing I do is I play music. I mean, I'm a part-time percussionist, and I've played percussion for flamenco groups mostly for the last 20-some years. And I've been jamming. We jam in my house, and I've been jamming with sitting in with other groups ever since I could, you know.
Do you find that those different arts influence each other? Like I've noticed, you know, when you read poetry, I can see the journalistic quality in it. You have a way of capturing almost a snapshot and a scene and really transporting to another place through your poetry. Do you find that the poetry influences the journalism in the same way? And
I don't know. I think the perspective I have about the world and so forth informs the way I
informs all
do
of it.
those things. And the other thing, though, that influences my poetry, that was one of the things that drew me to poetry, was music. That is, I heard music in the language, and then I heard music in poetry, and that's what drew me in. So those two things definitely. And I've written, as you alluded to, I've written some pieces that are connected to jazz themes and jazz people, as well as writing some poems that I've been told are sort of noir poems that fit with some sort of jazz accompaniment. And I thought I'd wrap it up with another one of my Harrisburg poems. It's sort of a longer piece. And it's about my old neighbors, Doc and Ellen, who were our neighbors for several years. And this is I think, an example of one of the types of poems I wrote where I write for people. This is Doc and Ellen. The old lady is still there, sitting on a porch swing, long gone, smoking Virginia Slims, taking notes of cars parking near our house, talking to no one in particular. I saw a blue car. I don't know that car. They're parked near your house. Ellen crime watched through cigarette haze, 78 years old, thick lens glasses, old-time Harrisburg. Her dad built the houses on this block. Brick duplexes, black and white photo of Ellen, young woman near rose bushes, our backyard, 1939. Her dad, a carpenter. Got to be a foreman, only one on a Pennsylvania Dutch crew who spoke English, built these brick houses, grew 6 rows of sweet potatoes in the lot across the street. Occupied by 2 houses now, he put those spuds in a barrel, buried for freshness. Ellen remembered names of famous Harrisburgers, but what she knew was office work, soda fountains, movies, and the 5 and dime downtown. Then marrying Doc, Melvin D. Miller, M.D. Miller, became Doc. Sheet metal worker, occasional sax player, roughneck. Doc showed up at their wedding day, bruised and dirty, his one suit all screwed up. Told me later he was drinking pre-wedding beers, and some joker decided to make a crummy comment about the bride-to-be. They rolled out into the street. Doc said, I probably broke somebody's windshield with the other guy's head. When we met Ellen and Doc, they were near the end of their tale. Ellen chain smoking most of the day, on the swing, on the porch, staring at whoever drove by. Only going inside a half an hour before Doc came home from hanging at a public golf course with some old buds from the VFW. Ellen would, every time, latch the screen door shut. A few minutes later, the nightly pantomime would begin. Doc trying to open the door. Damn it, woman, open the damn door for a few minutes. On days when all the windows were open, we could hear Ellen chuckling, then saying, Who's there? Okay, coming, coming. Ellen and Doc, all on their own. Most of their friends on the other side. Good neighbors like us helping out here and there. Ziza, my wife, cut Ellen's toenails for her, almost passing out from the smell. Artie, next door. Funny, gay Artie, dying of AIDS, would play cards with Ellen, who once said to me, You know, that Artie, he's a funny one. What's his story, Rick? I told her, wasn't sure. Maybe show business, not telling her Artie had been famous in Baltimore for his Pointer Sisters routine. The years marched on, the cigs caught up with Ellen. She went first, Doc inconsolable. Ziza made extra soup we brought him over for cookouts. Turns out Doc bought a microwave somehow. Hundreds of cartons laying around that I found after Doc checked out. Not long after that, I moved his car for a few days until we found his estranged daughter creditors started appearing at their door. Knocking and knocking. MasterCard, finally finding my phone number, called me almost begging for someone to seize. Turns out, Doc owed MasterCard $35,000. And I laughed so loudly, MasterCard and the rest never called again. And Doc left nothing but debt, an old car, and fond memories. Doc and Ellen gone and gone, like old Harrisburg, where a factory worker and a secretary could have a nice house in a nice neighborhood, walking distance to a union hall and a church and at least 4 bars. Doc and Ellen working, yelling, dying in love and in debt. Memory, slow fade, slow fade.
What are some of the other changes that you would like to see in Harrisburg's art community, and what do you want to bring to the poetry community in Harrisburg?
Well, I think to the poetry community and to the arts community in general, I'd like to see if there's a way for us to develop a forum that makes it easier for young people to interact with artists in general. And I'm not sure how that would be, but that's one of the things.
You've got 4 years. Go.
Yeah. I'm trying. I'm working on it. Yeah.
That is so exciting. Well, thank you for coming
Thank
and
you.
joining us and telling us about some of your plans. I'm so excited to get to see how Harrisburg grows and flourishes under your poetic tutelage.
Thank you.
And people that want to hear more of your work and know more about your work, they can go to the SoundCloud and to those pages, and they can also find books of yours, yes?
Yes. This one, Rufino's Secret, is on the Foothills Publishing page. Foothills
Which is a great little press.
It's a
Foothills
nice little
Publishing.
press based in New York. And a few of my poems are on a few other websites here and there, and I kind of lose track.
They're even on YouTube. If you go and Google Rick Kerns, you can find all kinds of wonderful treats.
Yeah,
definitely, Foothills Publishing is a great press.
Yeah, thanks.
So I cannot wait to have you back on in a few months to
Thank you.
hear more about what you've gotten started.
No,
But thank
thank
you
you
today for giving us a start.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks very much.
Joining us this evening is Michael Czarnecki, who has a great deal of experience in pretty much every aspect of literary art, from publishing, storytelling, editing, poetry, workshop leading. He does it all. But at the end of the day, the heart is always found in Wheeler Hill, a tiny little corner of the Susquehanna watershed, and in, of course, the poetry. So the poetry is where all this started, or did you come into the more technical aspect of teaching and publishing and then started writing?
Oh, it was poetry. It was the poetry. Junior year of high school, I wrote that first poem. I very clearly remember it in class. And
Were you supposed to be writing in class?
Yeah, we were supposed to. It was in the assignment. It was like, oh no, what am I going to write about? Yes, we had to write. But when I sat down and finally started writing, I remember finishing that poem and looking at it and just saying quietly to myself, wow, I wrote a poem. And that was 47 years ago, and I haven't stopped since. So that's where it started. All of the other stuff, the publishing we do, and the oral memoirs that I perform, and all of that all came later. I started writing junior year of high school, but it took me 18 years before I ever showed a poem. If You Come Knocking. And in this poem, I mentioned the Zen Buddhist monk poet Ryokan from 19th century Japan. Daughter sleeping, wife soaking in tub. I sip one more glass of wine, Read Zen poems of Ryokan. Outside, the night sky darkens. Venus sets low in the west. If you come knocking at my door, be prepared to sit in silence. Right. And I would share it with friends, but never with an audience. And that goes back to the second grade experience that scarred me. I don't know if you want me to go into. I tell the story.
What happened?
We were singing, and our teacher asked the 8th grade nun to come in and listen to us. We all stood next to our desks, and we sang this song. And as soon as we were done, the 8th grade nun, the principal, looked at me, pointed her finger at me, wagged it. Come with me. So here I was short little second grader.
Intimidating.
Oh, very much so. And I followed her out of the room, down the hall, down the steps, down the first floor hall, and into the 8th grade classroom, into the giants, where the giants are.
Right.
And she had me stand in front of the class and she went to her piano in the corner of the room and said, I'm going to play a note, I want you to hum it. So she played a note, I hummed, and they all laughed. And she played a second note, I hummed, they all laughed again. And she played a third note, and I was a good student, I hummed again. And they didn't laugh as much. And then all she said to me was, okay, you can go back to your classroom now. Exactly. I try to see the good in things. I have never, ever been able to figure out something good from that experience. She never stopped them from laughing. She never corrected them. And all she said to me is, okay, you can go back to it. Well, this is a poem called The Echo of What Has Passed. And I mentioned Dao Chen in this poem. Dao Chen was a Chinese poet from 1600 years ago. And I've been influenced a lot by the Chinese and Japanese poets. And in this poem, the word aware in relation to Zen Buddhism has to do with that awareness of the passing of time. It's associated with autumn, which is my favorite season. There's just that little poignancy of, time is moving on, and autumn really brings that out more than any of the other seasons. So I tried to capture that with this poem. The echo of what has passed. Dao Chen would understand. I sit drinking wine, chanting poems, dreaming of mountains. Bills pile high at the door, white hairs infiltrate my beard. Daughter approaches womanhood, young son no longer crawls. Late autumn, already snow has covered the ground. Sipping wine, I shiver as a cool breeze caresses me from behind.
And a big part of your traveling that you're quite well known for is your hitchhiking and your sort of the wandering aspect of your travels, and that you do end up in these completely remote places. Most people tend to travel regionally, not you. You are all over the place. Is there a particular reason is it just because of the connection? Like why hitchhiking? Why not just rent a car like everybody else?
Well, hitchhiking was a long time ago. Okay, I don't do that anymore now, but it was a long time ago because I never even had a driver's license. I didn't get a license till I was 24, And hitchhiking back, when I spent those, 3 years off and on the road, almost 30,000 miles of hitchhiking. Hitchhiking was just, you did that, that's what you did, And had great experiences, meeting people and staying in people's houses all the time. And for me, the traveling I do as a poet, I drive an old beat car, 21-year-old Honda Accord, and I love going on the road, meeting people. It's sort of, instead of hitchhiking, just wandering, now I'm going with a purpose, which is poetic. And I meet fascinating, wonderful people when I go on the road with that. And I still bring in a little bit of that old staying in people's houses from hitchhiking days. I barter for rooms, often. I've traded books for motel rooms. And often, if I want to have plans for the night, I'll be at a reading and I'll say, someone's got a spare couch, I'll trade a few books for them. And it's amazing, people that are open to that, And you have these adventures that way that you wouldn't have if you just pulled into town and spend money in a motel room. And then one other poem, having to do with birds. I feed birds. I've been feeding birds for decades. I know I'm older because I say so often decades ago. And little black-capped chickadees, I think everyone knows what chickadees are. And you can tame them, they'll come to your hand for seed, and I've fed them many times by hand. And one time I went out to feed them by hand, and instead I had this sudden idea to do it differently. And this poem relates that experience. And it's called Seeing Eye to Eye with a Chickadee. I know it's just for food you come. That's okay. It all gets down to food anyway, one way or another. Yet when I tip back my head, lay a few seeds in my beard, hear you call, dee-dee, dee-dee, and flutter just above my eyes. Feel your feet grasp my beard as you peck down for a seed, then fly off to a nearby tree to eat, and return again and again. I think maybe there's something more than just a few black oil sunflower seeds between us. Who knows? Hey, come spring, I'll let you build a nest with my hair, if you'd like. Thank you. Just about 20 years ago, where I said, there's probably less time I have than you have, and I should do what's important in my life. And I knew that was poetry and creativity. So I quit the job, and at that point we had 2 children, and the third one in the valley, and that was the only income we had. So, but it was like, it's what you do with your life is what's important, not how much money you make. And it was a struggle. A couple of months after making that change, I connected 2 words I never connected before. Poetry, if you add a V, turn a couple letters, poverty.
Poverty poets.
Yeah, I thought, they might have a common root back there in the language, But when I tell people it's only been poverty in dollars, life has been rich. And this is my life. This is, I can't, I tell people I'm not fit to do anything else anymore. And when I, meet poets on the road, when I go and share my poetry, and I hear what people say, afterwards, or get an email about somebody who's moved by something I did, or we release a book, the books we release, and poets that maybe I just met, or it's important. What I've come to believe is, as I've gotten older, I think maybe the most important things we do in life are those things we create, whether it's poetry, or music, or art, or love, or children. And when you create something, when you really think about that, when you create something, you're bringing something new into the world that didn't exist before. And the natural world is a big part of my life, part of my inspiration. And here's a poem called Midway Poem. And I love it when the sky is clear. I missed the lunar eclipse the other day because it was cloudy. It's like, I'm so wanting to see that. But here's a poem called Midway Poem. Jupiter rises in the east, Venus sets in the west. A half moon hangs halfway in the sky at midwinter as I stand midway between planets at midlife, feeling it's all one big carnival, and I was let in for free.
I'm Carla Christopher, and thank you for joining us right here on the corner of Culture in Maine for another episode of York's weekly cultural showcase, bringing you the very best of the art and culture scene in the York area. Now, if you like what you heard, or even if you didn't, we want to hear from you. So find us on Facebook and make sure to click like at facebook.com/cultureinmaine. Follow us on Twitter at cultureinmaine. Email us at cultureinmaine@gmail.com. Or to find all things Culture in Maine, check out our website, wrct.tv. Go to Channel 18, Show Profiles, and pick Culture in Maine. We want to also thank the artists who contributed to our set. We want to thank Packer and Case for Change for donating the guitar. And we want to thank, of course, the fabulous artist Lovey Reinhold Price. Find her under The Glass Vidalia on Facebook or by emailing theglassvidalia@gmail.com, and John Stump of jsphotographyfinearts.com. You can also look up JS Photography Fine Arts on Facebook as well. So be safe, be good to each other, and we will absolutely see you here next week on the corner of Culture and Maine.
I'm really excited about that.